All right, Andy, I say this all the time, even when I speak, this is one of my favorite topics. Influencers sometimes come in literally a second, right time, right place, or sometimes a lifetime. One of my first was my grandfather, my grandmother, my mom, my aunt, they came from Kiev and immigrated to Canada, and she had a little bit of an accent, but he used to take me for walks in the park when I was about 5 years old in Montreal, and he talked to everybody. And one day I asked him, I said, Zeta, how do you know all these people? And he pointed at somebody and he said, "You see that man over there?" One day I smiled at him and he looked up, he smiled at me, he came over to me and we were talking and we became friends. And then someone else saw us and he came over also. And and I said, "Wow," as a 5 year old, I said, "Well, life's pretty simple. I just got to keep smiling at people and things will happen." And in fact, we make it too complicated, but sometimes it is just that to even influence people. So we all have a lot of people that have influenced us. Sometimes in a bad way, sometimes in a good way. Can you share two or three that have been influential in your life?
Yeah, yeah. It's funny since you told that story. I like the idea of, first answer, best answer, who pops into my head. During the pandemic, I ended up getting really involved with mutual aid. So this idea of how do we take care of each other, like without necessarily, worrying ourselves about money and et cetera. Just how can we show up? And at one point, I ended up meeting a lot of houseless folks here in Chicago. And, at one point, it's interesting. There's a practice there of even just getting used to the idea of talking to folks that I don't know. I think I've been trained that they're different or there might be
Right.
barriers there or whatever. And then at the end of the day, if you just try it a few times, it might be awkward at first, but then eventually you just realize, oh, guess what? They're just people. So I
Mhm.
remember I'm walking down the street one day and I saw a guy sitting on the sidewalk, and I don't know. I think I maybe I assumed he was houseless, or I was just curious. So I just said, hey, are you okay? And he looked up at me and he said, yeah, are you? That's like I don't think about it all the time, but it's never left me. It pops in here and there.
Yeah, what about you? Man? Oh, yeah. Where did that go to?
That conversation.
Yeah.
That was the sum of it. I just kind of moved on in that particular situation and never saw him again. So
That's
I
funny.
say that to your point, like the first I'll say two more and they're more bigger figures or one of them's more well known. But I love how you framed it as like an influencer might be that one microscopic moment in time that someone just said something that lingered with you.
And maybe it's not even by accident. Who knows?
Probably not. I am going to go with my older brother as an influencer. Gosh, I don't know. For anybody lucky enough to have a sibling at all or an older one, it's like, how could they not? And I know not everybody's close to their siblings, so I'm fortunate to be close with mine. But I feel like so much of my journey was guided by him, and that's kind of his nature too. Like if we're playing a family board game night, he'd be the one to get it out and read the instructions and kind of teach everybody how to do it. Uh, but yeah, just so much uh, solidarity and grounding comes from, just knowing I've got an older brother and he's got my back. Um, and we actually for in our 20s we lived together for 4 years, and yeah, that was extraordinary. Yeah,
Those are the moments to cherish, man.
yeah, absolutely. And then I'm going to go with a well-known figure for the third one, which is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And it's interesting. My dad was a philosophy professor, and when I was in college, he recommended that I read Letter from a Birmingham Jail, and I'm glad he did. Because that is just such an extraordinary work. And over the years, you know, the more I learned about Dr. King, the deeper it went, and then eventually, I've been to Montgomery, Alabama twice now, and so I visited the jail, eventually, and then the last time I was there last year, learned so much more about the bus boycott and I think a lot of these movements, it kind of seems like they just happened overnight, but those movements took years.
Yeah.
You know? So yeah, just the strategy, the solidarity, the love. And just the other day, I actually didn't know this, but I heard that uh, the I Have a Dream speech, there's the famous part we all know, but I guess there's a part that came before that that his staff wrote that was not very good. It was very kind of down and just not very inspiring. And then I think somebody sort of whispered in his ear, like, you know what? Why don't you talk about that dream you had?
Wow.
I did not realize that was all like off the cuff. That was just that's why it's so powerful, right? Like, and I, as an entrepreneur, I know that because it's like I'm pitching all the time and trying to do things, and if I'm doing the script, people are less inspired. But if I'm just speaking from my heart, they're more inspired.
That's amazing stories all the way around. And I don't think things are necessarily by accident. Like, are you okay? And that person's there at that time, or somebody said, "What about that dream?" And it becomes iconic or whatever the right word is. But it also makes us realize that we're always influencing people, even if we don't know it, by something we do. Maybe it's a smile, maybe it's a bad remark, like whatever to somebody, and they're in a bad place, and it just exasperates it more. But it's something we should all think about, that maybe a smile is better than anything else if you got nothing else to say, especially, and influence some people in a positive way, because it is contagious. There's no doubt about it. So thanks for sharing all that.
Welcome. Thank you.